So this is part 2 of the grounding scheme in the Ampeg Gemini 6 amplifier. And as you can see here, I've added the isolator chip, which now prevents the chassis to connect with the housing, the metal housing of the filter supply capacitor. So this is now isolated from the rest of the amplifier. And I've also removed the chassis ground here and added this brown wire which connects to the negative of this filter cap, leading now the entire ground to the input jack. And so one would now want to test what kind of effect this has had. All right, here's the sound pressure level meter, and we turn it up all the way. And it goes up initially, and then it comes down a little. And to be honest with you, it probably doesn't make a whole lot of difference. I thought that it would. This is the way Ampeg did it. But to be honest, it's almost the same, if not a tiny bit louder. Okay, now as I put my hand towards the chassis, it raises the noise. In any case, one would probably not be running this thing with the controls fully on 10. But I would like to address the way this is mounted to the chassis, because if you reach down below here and wiggle it a little bit, you can see that the capacitor moves around a little bit. In terms of isolation, this is a good solution, but it's not as mechanically sound as I'd like it to be. And so one of the problems that happened was that while the amp was in storage, this capacitor got bumped and it broke this chip, which is why I had to replace it. Now the Fender way of doing things is pretty cool with the clamp, because it attaches it mechanically to the chassis in a very solid and reliable way, but it creates a ground at the chassis. And if sections of the filter capacitor are going to different parts of the amp, you can create ground loops. And so it's not an ideal solution, but it is what they used on the Silverface Champ and the Princeton Reverb. And they're not especially high gain situations, so it probably didn't add a lot of noise. One of the solutions that Mojotone came up with was to encase their filters, their multi-section can caps, in a plastic wrapper, which would allow you to clamp it to the chassis, but not ground it to the chassis in the same place, and then you can run the ground to wherever you like. But once again, there are multiple sections there going to different parts of the amp, and that might not be an ideal situation in terms of the grounding scheme. In any case, I'm not going to be redoing this the way it was before to lose a couple of dB, because as I said, we probably won't be running this thing at full bore. It's mostly going to be used as a bass amp anyway. And so from this point on, we go to the vibrato bug here, and that's going to be replaced, and that will be the subject of our next installment. Cheers.